Hello everyone and welcome to FiST Chat, the vodcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern on Valentine's Day of all days to discuss something probably not romantic, but anyway, we'll get there in the end. How you doing there, Steve?
I'm well, thanks, Ben. Hi, FiST Chat fans, and yes, good Valentine's Day to you, and I hope later on you'll be going out somewhere with your loved ones to stare at the stars. What could be better?
Oh, absolutely. And
that is the best form of space exploration after all.
Absolutely. So that is a nice segue into our topic today, space exploration. We've talked about going to Mars before, and we've talked more about the feasibility of it, what would happen if we'd go there. But there's another aspect to it, and it's got to do with funding. Someone's got to pay for it, and as we saw this week in the news, we've got issues with with NASA. They're juggling all these priorities. They had funding for going to Mars, or they had funding for far-off cosmos exploration, and the missions to Mars lost. Now, that doesn't actually mean that the missions to Mars won't potentially go ahead, because that was a work in progress with the Europeans, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
And so that could still go ahead, say if they team up with someone else, like the Russians, for example. But this is really kind of disappointing. It's we were discussing before we started, this to me seems like finally a sort of definitive type of example to the question, what happens to America after the GFC? You take something very iconic like the space program, which they, in effect, they were right there at the beginning. They made it. Obviously the Russians were there as well, but, they got a man to the moon. They did all of that. And they're known throughout the world for this, yet this is now it's like a symbol of their power, their might in the world, and now the GFC's hit it, and this is an example of how one could argue their might is sort of dissipating.
Well, it's...
Or is it just that they've got their priorities screwed up?
No, I think you were spot on, Ben. Their might is dissipating. All around the world, America is a world leader. We've accepted that for the last 50 years, and certainly their space program has been there for 50 years, and it's led humans into space. It's a remarkable achievement. We know that the US is in a lot of debt, but let's just look at this sanely. $300 million when you're $1 trillion in debt. It might look like you're getting tough. If you're in the administration, it might look like you're cutting back on a program that really doesn't matter. But the Americans, around the world always cop a little bit of niggle, I guess, about their foreign policy. This is the one thing that the Americans do that they do for everyone on the planet, and they're trashing it. Well, I don't know what to say. It's awful. They're ruining their iconic status, and they're letting slip something that they have every right to be proud of, and the rest of the world looks to them with admiration for. It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't at all. I mean, Barack Obama was only saying, I think 2 years ago, that it was his intention to get astronauts into space, into Mars, and now it's a fiscal reality that it's not going to happen. The irony, of course, if you think about it, is if they are involved in any way, they're going to have to, colloquially speaking, sort of hitch a ride with the Russians to get there, or with the Europeans or whatever. But if it's with the Russians, you can't really, the irony there, you can't really escape, considering the rivalry that they had at the beginning of the space age.
That's interesting, though, because historically the two administrations politically had a great rivalry, as we all know, which was the Cold War. But I've heard stories that the actual astronomical societies and the space agencies themselves, behind closed doors, actually got on very well, even during the space race. I think they were united in their interest and love for space exploration. So it certainly hurts. And I think also what's particularly sad about this decision to cut NASA's space exploration funding is that these were actually international programs that were run through the European Space Agency and with the Russians. And now the Americans are not just turning their backs on it themselves, but they're kind of letting down the world. And I just, this is something that's essential for humanity, is the exploration of space. And we can certainly talk more about that because there's a lot to be said on that.
Yeah. Well, just on that, this is going to affect NASA's reputation. Now, that's almost unthinkable, really. That was the bedrock, one of the bedrocks of of the whole shebang, so to speak, in terms of space exploration. And now, with this type of announcement in pulling funding out of this type of a program, they suddenly risk becoming, the agency that is unreliable, that they can't go to, that's twitchy, that kind of thing, which is a real shame. It's because they don't really deserve it, and it's obviously not the. I'm sure there's plenty of people in the agency itself that are screaming at the moment that they can't do this stuff. But obviously, if the government's not funding it, what can they do about it?
Well, and you also have to look at the other implications of a cut like this. Just in real terms, is that NASA is at the forefront of engineering, and we all know that they make some amazing, technologies, or implement some amazing technologies to actually, get the craft into space and for space exploration. This effectively will eliminate a whole tier of engineers and scientists at the highest level. So they're actually reducing their capacity in the future for this as well. So this isn't just a short-term cut. This is actually a longer-term cut in terms of expertise. And, we could list a whole host of things that NASA have created and provided for, that have trickled down into our everyday life, from medical devices right through to, just the imaging, optics. These sorts of technologies now will be ceded to other countries who do invest in the space race, like China and India. And I just, once again, it just doesn't make any sense for the Americans to allow anyone to take away their mantle of the nation that leads space exploration.
But then again, could this perhaps, you couldn't say this directly, does it? But it sort of is leading into a new environment where you get multiple countries all working together, maybe to, it's kind of was going that way anyway, because, the Mir space station, you had like the cooperation with the Russians and that sort of thing. And with obviously the Mars missions, the Europeans were involved, and other entities. Maybe this is a way for all these other countries to get together and work on this common goal of getting humans to Mars and further out into space. Maybe this is like the type of thing that can really bring these types of countries together.
Well, I think you'll see that other countries will pick up the slack. And the good thing is that NASA isn't turning their back, I guess, completely on space exploration. But, maybe, as you say, this will lead to greater cooperation because, space exploration is very expensive. But compared to some expenditures that actually occur within administrations in Europe, in the States, and around the world in the space nations, the $300 million they're cutting is really so tiny, and it gives them so much.
Well, if you think of any standard government red tape and bureaucracy and the amount of money that gets wasted, this is really not a lot of money at all. But what about? Do you think maybe they are trying to send that signal that they're serious about their budget? They want to do you think maybe the Americans themselves think that
I think there's no question. Internally, if you can picture what the political situation would be like, you've got to cut. Where are you going to make those cuts? Well, let's face it, most people think space is remote, and nobody's going to get out in the streets and, probably riot over NASA the way they're rioting over cutting the social services in Greece. So, cutting back NASA is a safe bet. And that's why typically, you'll see cuts like this in any situation like this, against organisations which while they may have captured the public imagination, probably won't lead, or people perceive that they can do without.
Well, then, so it would seem then that the public, maybe in general, would consider this type of work more of a novelty rather than a something important.
That's right. People don't perceive, space exploration. If you put space exploration up against medical research, I'm sure most people will say, "Oh, I choose medical research every time." But what they don't realise is that actually NASA has created a number of filtration systems for hospitals and a number of other techniques that actually do impact in the medical research sphere.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's just incredible because it's almost an imperative thing given the way things are at the moment. At some point, we have to look at space not just as a place to look at and explore, but we're going to be moving into space as well as a species, because that is almost the inevitable sort of trajectory that we're going on. And
we've only got 5 billion years in which to get off this planet, because at that point the sun just will take us out.
Oh, well, so we got a bit of time up our sleeves there, but it would be good if you can see that humanity's always had that thirst for for that knowledge of what's going on out there, what's happening in space, and also the desire to travel through space and get out there amongst it. This seems almost like a sort of figurative kind of setback for that type of thinking, and hopefully it won't derail the process too much. And the hope is, of course, that the other countries pick up the slack.
Well, if you actually just Google space quotes, I think you'll probably find there's a page that has everyone from Carl Sagan right back to people in the 19th century talking about space. And Arthur C. Clarke, there's Asimov and, Heinlein and a whole host, Sagan, as I said, talking about space, as well as a whole lot of astronauts. But the truth is that Arthur C. Clarke made a lot of great predictions, and one of them is that we will continue to evolve, which I think there's no question. Most experts, today would only give us maybe a 50% chance of our species seeing out the next 1,000 years on Earth, owing to what we're doing to the planet, which might be a fair call. Our future is in space. There's no question our future is in space one way or another. And we will move out into space and populate it. So really, space exploration should be at the forefront of humanity's goals and ambitions. It sounds far-fetched, it sounds science fiction, but it actually makes a lot of sense long term. And it means that you can potentially move polluting industries or dangerous industries off the planet. You can, do a lot of things in outer space, or a lot of things that humans can do through populating space. And as I say, most people think that's just crazy talk, but I think if you really have a long, hard think of where humans will be in another 1,000 years, it makes perfect sense. And I would have thought the Americans would have wanted to be there first.
No, absolutely. Well, let's hope the bean counters in the US government sort of take on those notions that you've just described. Okay, so it looks like we're out of time, but always fascinating. Thanks again, Steve, for the chats. Always good. And I'm sure we can return to this topic because I'm sure there'll be more on space exploration, and maybe there'll be some further developments. Maybe NASA will pull a rabbit out of the hat somewhere.
Let's hope so, Ben, because let's face it, we really want to know more about our lovely red cousin Mars.
Absolutely. And you've still got the seat booked somewhere, haven't you? Or you want to get one?
I have. I think now with the cutbacks to NASA, I'm almost a zero chance of going, but there you go.
Let's hope. All right, so don't forget our websites at www.fistchat.com. You can get all our links there and watch us and read our blogs. We'll have some new blogs this week on this tragic cut to NASA's funding. So that's it for this week's episode. We'll catch you next week.